The range was silent, but not from discipline. It was the silence that comes when something unexplainable has just happened. Young soldiers stood frozen, rifles slack in their hands, their eyes fixed on one man who wasn't even in uniform. No orders were shouted. No laughter remained. Just the weight of a presence they had mocked only minutes before. Dust swirled in the fading light, and in that stillness, the question burned hotter than gunpowder. Who exactly was this old janitor? Some stared at their own hands, wondering if age would steal their strength too, or if this man had never been ordinary at all. Because in that moment, even the air seemed to wait for his next move. And to understand how the silence began, you have to go back to a scorching afternoon on the firing line at Fort Ravenwood. Sergeant Collins had been carrying a wound no one could see. 3 months earlier, he had failed a critical marksmanship exam. Whispers followed him through the barracks. Too soft. Not ready. Maybe officer school was a mistake. His name had already been scratched off the list for an advanced slot he wanted desperately. Every drill since then felt like a chance to claw his pride back. So when the old janitor shuffled onto his range that afternoon, Collins saw more than a custodian. He saw an opportunity. Humiliate the relic. Win back the respect of his men. A small cruelty to patch a career already fraying at the edges. The Georgia sun hammered Fort Ravenwood's firing line. Heat shimmered across the ground, bending the steel targets into mirages at 600 yards. Sweat darkened the collars of young recruits, rifles heavy on their shoulders, jokes flying fast to mask exhaustion. Through their laughter moved Raymond Harlow, 85 years old, broom in hand, his windbreaker hanging loose on narrow shoulders. His face was lined and leathered, eyes pale like weathered glass. To most, he was a fixture. Like the benches or the sandbags noticed only when the floor wasn't clean. "Hey, Grandpa," a recruit shouted. "Show us how it's done." The rest burst out, their chuckles sharp in the thick heat. Phones lifted, ready to capture a stumble worth replaying later. Collins caught the moment and leaned into it. He plucked an M4 from the rack, twirling it once before holding it out. "Come on, sir. Prove you've still got something left in those arms." His voice carried just loud enough, calculated for the crowd. Harlow's head rose. His gaze met Collins', steady and unreadable. He said nothing, only reached out, movements deliberate, taking the rifle with hands scarred by time but steady as stone. The crowd shuffled closer. Boots scraped gravel, forming a loose half-circle. Anticipation thickened the cruel kind, waiting for a fumble, a misfire, anything to confirm their arrogance. Harlow stepped onto the line, his spine straightened, shoulders settling into a posture none of them expected. He brought the rifle up, cheek to stock, as if muscle and wood had known each other for decades. For a heartbeat, the noise of the range bled away. The laughter, the whispers, even the clatter of brass seemed to vanish. There was only him, the rifle, and the faint gleam of steel far downrange. His finger eased onto the trigger. His breathing slowed, chest rising in rhythm carved long ago. One exhale. A squeeze. The crack split the air. A target at the farthest post lurched, wrenched clean off its mount, collapsing into the dirt with a metallic scream. The line froze. Recruits stood open-mouthed, phones lowering in unison. They had expected comedy, not precision, not perfection. Collins blinked hard. He'd imagined a tremor, a jam, anything to confirm the old man's frailty. But what he saw was a shot his best men would need 3 tries to land. Harlow lowered the rifle in silence. His expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to look past the range, past the recruits. For a flicker, he was 23 again, mud clinging to his uniform, belly pressed into elephant grass. Mortars thundered overhead. His spotter's voice crackled through memory. Wind left. 2 clicks. He squeezed, and a shadow in the distant field dropped without a sound. No cheer, no triumph, just coordinates whispered for the next shot. He blinked, and the vision dissolved like smoke. His hands remained still. They hadn't shaken then. They didn't shake now. Some memories the body carries when the mind wants to forget. He clicked the safety on, set the rifle back on the bench, and turned. His broom still leaned against the wall, bristles resting in dust. He picked it up without hesitation, sweeping brass into neat lines, rhythm unbroken. The recruits shifted uneasily. Some tried to laugh, but the sound faltered halfway. Others stared at the fallen target, trying to reconcile the impossible with the janitor in front of them. At the edge of the range, Sergeant Major Nathan Cole had been watching, A visiting officer, silent against the fence. His eyes tracked every detail, how Harlow's elbows locked, how he leaned into recoil, the precision of someone who had drilled this craft far beyond regulation training. Cole pulled out his phone, zoomed the camera on Harlow's wrist. The watch, inward-facing, worn with age. He enhanced the image. Serial number barely visible beneath decades of scratches. P12087. His blood ran cold. Phantom 1-2 wasn't a rumor. It was standing 20 feet away, sweeping brass like nothing mattered. Collins tried to salvage control. "Lucky shot," he said too loudly, trying to inject certainty he didn't feel. But the words hung flat, ignored by recruits who now whispered among themselves, eyes drawn back to Harlow. The janitor gave no reply. He swept, methodical, as though nothing had shifted. But everything had. Respect had replaced mockery. Curiosity had replaced contempt. Cole folded his arms, studying the old man. He had seen arrogance humbled before. But this was something different. It was the resurfacing of a ghost. The sun sagged lower, shadows pulling long across the range. Dust rose and drifted, catching golden light with each sweep of Harlow's broom. The target lay twisted in the dirt, mute proof of something the recruits couldn't name yet. Collins barked fresh orders, desperate to pull focus back to himself. Drills resumed, but the rhythm was broken. Every shot sounded hollow after what they'd witnessed. Cole pushed off the fence, boots crunching in gravel. He stole one more glance at the janitor, committing the image to memory. Then he turned away, thoughts racing. Something had shifted inside Fort Ravenwood. The recruits didn't know it. Collins didn't sense it. But Cole did. The ghost of an older war had just stepped back into the light, and the question lingered, heavier than the shot itself. Who exactly was Raymond Harlow? Whispers clung to the line long after the target fell. Recruits muttered low, shifting uneasily, eyes darting toward the janitor who swept brass as if nothing had happened. No one dared laugh now. Raymond Harlow gave them nothing. No smile, no acknowledgement. He moved with calm repetition, broom dragging a slow arc across concrete, as though silence itself were his shield. At the far end, Sergeant Major Nathan Cole adjusted his cap. His eyes tracked every detail. The way Harlow bent his knees, not stiff but deliberate. The way he balanced his weight, fluid, economical. It wasn't an old man's posture. It was a soldier's crouch, carved deep into muscle memory. Cole's thoughts flashed back to classified files, heavy with redactions. Names that disappeared from rosters, men who had been erased. He remembered one in particular, Harlow, a rumor tied to missions never officially logged. The coincidence was too sharp. On the line, the tension curdled. Recruits tried to push back with cruelty. "Do it again, old man," one shouted, voice too high. Another forced a laugh. "Yeah, one shot doesn't make a sniper." Their jeers sounded thin, like paper. Collins stepped forward, seizing his moment. He pulled a rifle from the rack, one notorious for jamming. He held it tight, fingers drumming the barrel, and leaned close to Harlow. His voice dropped so only the janitor could hear. "My dad was in Nam. Came back broken. You people did that. Turned men into weapons, then threw them away." For the first time, Harlow's eyes flickered. The broom paused. His jaw set, faint but clear. "Your father's name?" The question was quiet. Not a challenge, a recognition. "Captain David Collins, 2nd Battalion." The old man's gaze shifted, as if seeing something that wasn't there. A beat of silence stretched thin. "I knew him," Harlow murmured. "Good man. I'm sorry." Collins recoiled. The words weren't mockery, they were worse. They were real. They left his anger unmoored, his cruelty suddenly exposed as pettiness. He shoved the rifle into Harlow's chest, hands trembling now for reasons he couldn't name. "Let's see if you can repeat the miracle." He barked louder, mask snapping back on for the recruit's ears. Harlow took the weapon. His thumb brushed the chamber with surprising gentleness, then twisted the bolt, tapped the side, and cleared the jam in 3 practiced motions. Tap, rack, reset. It was instinct, as smooth as breathing. The crowd leaned forward, expecting a stumble. But there was no stumble. Harlow lifted the rifle, cheek to stock, sight sliding into place like a door closing. Crack. The target spun off its post, ringing against the dirt. No one cheered. No one even breathed. A second impossible shot had turned doubt into something else, fear. Cole's stomach tightened. He had expected it, but seeing it unfold made his pulse hammer. The files weren't dead. They were standing here, alive, broom in hand. Collins barked a laugh, too loud, voice brittle. Lucky twice, huh? But the recruits didn't echo him. They only stared, eyes locked on the old man who had already lowered the rifle and picked up his broom again. Harlow's lips moved faintly, barely audible. Cole leaned forward to catch it. Slow as smooth, smooth as fast. The phrase slammed into him. It wasn't casual advice. It was cadence, a code. Words carried from whispered briefings about units that didn't exist on paper. Cole stepped back, heart racing. Every piece aligned now. The stance, the watch, the phrase. Phantom 1-2. It wasn't a ghost story, it was here. Sweeping brass in front of 20 witnesses. The recruits still didn't grasp it. They tried to fit the old man into their world of manuals and drills. But Collins wasn't ready to surrender. He leaned forward again, desperate. 3,000 meters, he sneered. Bet you can't even see that far. His words spilled out as bait. Half challenge, half plea. Harlow didn't rise. He only glanced downrange, toward the shimmering dots of steel, almost invisible against the haze. He said nothing, but his silence unsettled more than boasts ever could. Cole's instincts screamed. Collins was pushing at something he didn't understand, like a child poking a live wire. The recruits shuffled, sensing it too, but Collins pressed harder. Do it, old man. Or admit the first two were luck. His tone cracked, sweat shining on his temple. The mask of control was slipping, and every man present saw it. Cole couldn't wait anymore. He pulled out his phone, thumb scrolling to a number almost never used. A line reserved for emergencies that couldn't touch official channels. His pulse thudded as he pressed dial. The voice came sharp. Identify. Sergeant Major Nathan Cole, Fort Ravenwood. Subject is Raymond Harlow, serial mark P12087. He just dropped 2 impossible shots. Cole's tone was clipped, precise. Silence. Then a hissed response. Jesus Christ, how long has he been there? 12 years. As a janitor, we buried Phantom 1-2 for a reason. If this leaks... The voice cut off, drew a sharp breath. Stand by. General Mathis is wheels up in 10. Contain the scene. No footage leaves that range. The line went dead. Cole pocketed the phone, heartbeat slamming. The cavalry was already coming. Back at the firing line, recruits shuffled nervously. Collins barked orders, forcing them back into drills, but his voice cracked with every word. Their shots rang dull, echoing against steel without conviction. Meanwhile, Harlow swept brass with steady rhythm. Tap, scratch, sweep. Each stroke louder than the rifles themselves, as though mocking every round the recruits missed. Cole's eyes narrowed. They didn't realize what they stood beside. Collins didn't understand what he was provoking. But Cole did. He had seen ghosts surface before, and once awakened, they never returned quietly. The sun sank lower, bleeding red across the dirt. Shadows stretched long. Targets lay twisted where Harlow's bullets had struck, and in that growing dusk, the question pressed heavier with every breath. Who was Raymond Harlow, and what else was buried beneath the broom? By nightfall, the range still carried the weight of unease. Recruits whispered in clumps, rifles hanging loose. Every eye flicked toward the janitor who swept brass as if the day were ordinary. No one believed that anymore. Rumors churned in the barracks air. Some swore he was a retired sniper who had wandered back by mistake. Others insisted the targets had been tampered with. Nothing explained what their own eyes had seen. Sergeant Collins paced the line, jaw clenched. His authority had bled out with each impossible shot. The recruits no longer looked to him for confidence. They looked at the old man. Each sideways glance sliced deeper, feeding a rage born of shame. But under that rage was something else. Every time Collins looked at Harlow, he saw the shadow of his father, David Collins. Captain, wounded in Vietnam. A man who had come home changed, hollow-eyed, never speaking of the war. A father who had left him questions instead of guidance. And here was the janitor, holding answers he hadn't asked for. Collins' voice cut through the murmurs. If you're so good, prove it for real. Long array. 3,500 meters. The words landed heavy. Even the boldest recruits stiffened. The far array wasn't standard issue, it was an experimental test bed. Plates rigged with sensors so sensitive they logged microfractures from bullet strikes. Few soldiers hit clean at that distance, none on the first try. Harlow didn't flinch. He simply set the broom aside and looked across the barren field. His pale eyes narrowed at the distant glints of metal, barely visible in the dusk haze. For him, distance collapsed. The horizon folding in. Collins shoved a rifle forward. Not a beat-up training gun this time, but a sleek precision model pulled from the armory for testing. His hand trembled even as he forced a smirk. Take it. Or admit the first two were luck. Harlow placed a hand on the weapon. He pulled it close with a kind of reverence, like greeting an old comrade. His fingers moved over the scope, adjusting with instinct instead of calculation. The crowd leaned closer. Phones lifted again, lenses glowing in the twilight. He sank to one knee, then the other, settling prone in the dirt. The motion was smooth, efficient, an echo of years buried. Elbows planted, cheek pressed to stock, rifle steady. Cole stood behind the line, chest tight. He'd hoped it wouldn't come to this, but he could see it in the old man's movements. This wasn't a demonstration. It was a return. Harlow closed one eye, the other fixed downrange. His breathing slowed until his chest barely moved. And then the memories came. Not the victories. The faces. Nguyen, the interpreter, barely 20, shot in the back while carrying a message Harlow had been 30 seconds late delivering. Martinez, bleeding out in his arms, whispering for his mother as Harlow lied about medics on the way. A village burned because the order said necessary. The commander who told them it was justified. The silence afterward, heavier than any gunfire. He had swept floors for 40 years, trying to sweep them away. Thought if he stayed small enough, invisible enough, the ghosts would forget. But ghosts don't forget. They wait. His finger curled around the trigger. One more shot, then never again. The recruits around him barely breathed. Private Chen's lips moved in silent prayer. Collins's fists clenched, nails cutting into his palms. Cole's heart hammered, already hearing the outcome in his mind. The world shrank to numbers only Harlow could see. Wind speed, humidity, the drag of air across bullet copper, even the rotation of the earth itself. Calculations written in bone, not paper. He exhaled. The rifle cracked. A thunderclap rolled over the range. For a heartbeat, no one could tell. The distance was too great, the silence too long. Then the far sensor plate burst. The tower lights blazed crimson. Sirens wailed across the range. Alarms meant for testing now screaming at the impossible. The line erupted. Recruits staggered, shouting, eyes wide. Some swore. Others just stared, mouths open. Collins froze, his smirk dissolving into ash. He had asked for a miracle. He had gotten it, and it had destroyed him. Chen lowered his phone, video still recording. His hands shook so badly the frame blurred. He'd joined the army chasing images of glory. What he'd seen instead was burden an old man carrying weight no one wanted. Another recruit muttered, voice cracking. My granddad never talked about the war either, someone else whispered. Almost inaudible. Now I know why. Inside the control trailer, red lights blinked on every console. Automated logs flagged anomalies. Data feeds scrolled. Servers pulled the ID tied to the shot. One name glowed on screen, Raymond Harlow. File attached. Phantom 1-2 program. Status, terminated 1973. Access, eyes only. Cole's phone buzzed at his side. A single text appeared. Verification confirmed. Secure the scene. Witnesses contained. His stomach dropped. The machine was already moving. Collins tried to rally, his voice cracking. He cheated. No way that's real. But no one echoed him. The recruits weren't listening anymore. Their eyes were locked on the janitor, who now laid the rifle aside with calm finality. Harlow rose slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. No pride. No flourish. Just weary steadiness. Cole stepped forward, voice low but cutting through the murmurs. You've been mocking a ghost. And tonight, you woke him. Collins spun toward him. He's just a civilian. The rest died in his throat as the ground trembled. Rotor blades. Distant at first, then swelling fast. Dark shapes skimmed low over the tree line, lights flashing. Helicopters inbound, heavy and urgent. The recruits craned their necks, shielding eyes from the glare. Dust swirled in choking clouds as floodlights snapped on, flooding the range in white. Boots slammed the ground, armed MPs poured out, fanning into perfect formation. But their rifles stayed low. Their posture wasn't hostile. It was protective. They weren't here to arrest Raymond Harlow. They were here to contain what he represented. Collins tried to shout orders. but the roar of rotors swallowed his voice. No one looked at him anymore. Authority had shifted. Harlow stood still in the storm of noise. His windbreaker snapped in the wind. His white hair whipped across his forehead. His eyes stayed calm, almost resigned. He had seen this before. He knew how the dance ended. Cole's voice rose above the chaos. "Stand down! This isn't your fight!" He wasn't warning Harlow. He was warning the young recruits whose world had just shattered. One of them whispered, barely audible over the thunder. "Who is he?" No one answered. The truth weighed too much to speak aloud. The final helicopter touched down. Dust fell like ash in the sudden quiet. From its door stepped an officer whose very presence silenced the field. Stars glinted on his collar. His stride was steady, deliberate. His eyes locked on one man, only the janitor with the broom. And in that moment, every recruit understood. Raymond Harlow wasn't invisible anymore. He was the center of everything. The general stopped at the edge of the line. Dust clung to his boots, jacket gleaming with stars. His eyes fixed on one man, and the air itself seemed to harden. Raymond Harlow. The name carried weight. Not a question, an acknowledgement. The recruits shifted uneasily, realizing they stood inside something far bigger than training. Harlow didn't answer. He leaned his broom against the bench, folding his hands quietly in front of him. The motion was simple, but it carried the dignity of a salute. The general drew himself upright. "Unit Phantom, 1-2. Thought we'd buried you with the files." The words struck like thunder. Gasps rippled through the recruits. They didn't know the name, but the tone told them enough. Collins stood rigid, face pale. Even his anger couldn't mask the fear. Cole stepped forward, salute crisp. The general returned it absently, his gaze still locked on Harlow. "Men like you don't fade," he said. "You carried this nation's secrets while the rest of us slept." Harlow's eyes held steady. But for a flicker, something passed through them, not pride, but the weight of ghosts pressing forward. His jaw tightened, just once, then stilled. The general pivoted to the recruits. His voice sharpened. "You mocked him, but this man kept wars from reaching your door. He saved lives you'll never know, on missions you'll never read." Silence spread like a blade drawn across the field. Collins swallowed hard, words caught in his throat. The recruits lowered their heads, shame pressing heavy. Then the general did what none expected. He snapped his arm into a full salute directed squarely at the janitor. The shock hit like a wave. For a moment, no one moved. Then one by one, recruits raised trembling hands. A line of young soldiers saluting the man they had laughed at hours before. Harlow inclined his head. Not pride, not triumph, just acknowledgement. His eyes glistened for a heartbeat, then cleared. The general lowered his arm. His tone softened, but only slightly. "We can bring you back. Consulting, training, recognition, pension, full and restored." Harlow shook his head, firm but without hostility. "No, sir. Been finished since '73. The general studied him for a long moment, then leaned closer. His voice dropped low enough that only Harlow and perhaps Cole could hear. "You knew David Collins's boy was here." A pause. "I knew." Collins flinched at the sound of his father's name. His eyes burned, but he couldn't look away. The general's jaw tightened. "Did you?" "I let him see what his father was." Harlow cut in, voice barely a whisper. "Not heroes. Just men who survived. Some of us didn't even do that right." The general studied him, then nodded slowly. A lifetime of understanding passed between them in that silence. "Dismissed, soldier, for the first time in 50 years. Someone called him that." The general stepped back. Engines roared to life again. Dust swirled as the entourage returned to the helicopters. Rotors thundered, washing the range in wind and noise. But the spell remained unbroken. When the helicopters faded into the night sky, the silence was different. Not awe, not fear. Something heavier, something true. Collins stood frozen for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. His face was stripped raw, all the bravado and cruelty drained away. "My dad," his voice broke. "Did he?" Harlow met his eyes. "He saved me. Twice. Took a round meant for me at Quezon. Carried a wounded man 4 clicks when I couldn't." His voice was soft, without embellishment. "The war took pieces of all of us. He gave more than most." Collins blinked hard. Tears cut tracks down his face. "He never told us, never said anything. The ones who talked the most," Harlow said gently, "usually saw the least. Your father was a good man. Don't let silence convince you otherwise. Collins nodded once, shoulders shaking. He couldn't speak. He simply turned and walked away, carrying something heavier than shame understanding. The recruits began to disperse slowly, their bravado gone. But Private Chen lingered, hesitant. His voice came out cracked and small. Sir, how do you carry it? All of it. Harlow looked at him for a long moment. The question deserved honesty. You don't, he said finally. You just keep sweeping. He picked up his broom. For the first time that night, his hand trembled. Just for a moment. He tightened his grip until it steadied again, then turned toward the armory. His footsteps faded into shadow, slow and measured. This time, no one watched him leave. They were too busy looking at their own hands, wondering what weight they'd carry when the shooting stopped, wondering if they'd have the strength to keep sweeping when the ghosts came calling. Cole remained alone on the range, staring at the fallen targets in the distance. He pulled out his phone, looked at the photo of Harlow's watch one last time, then deleted it. He powered the device down completely. Some secrets, he decided, weren't meant for files. Some ghosts were better left to rest. The floodlights snapped off, one by one. Darkness rolled back over Fort Ravenwood, reclaiming the range, and somewhere in that darkness, an old janitor kept sweeping, the rhythmic scratch of bristles on concrete the only sound that remained. His ghosts followed quietly at his side. They always would. But tonight, for the first time in 40 years, they felt a little lighter.